In this video, we are going to go through the Properties tabs in Blender. The Properties tabs are probably one of the most important areas. This is where we could do things like more advanced manipulation of our meshes, creating and assigning materials and textures, or even customizing rendering options. I'm going to start from the topmost tab and work my way down. The first one we have here is the Active Tool and Workspace settings. This is simply a reflection of some of the details we already covered in previous tutorial videos. As you can see, we currently have box selection on, so it's reflecting box selection. If I change to move, it becomes move. This is really all this tab is used for. The next few tabs are to do with rendering. This is the render properties, the output properties, and the view layer properties. I will probably make another video to explain these in more depth, but these tabs essentially customize how our renders work in Blender. You can do things like ambient inclusion, you can add bloom, there's settings for hair and shadows and etc. And then the output properties is essentially, well, just that, the output of the render. The scene properties allows us to change quite a few things. Firstly, we can change which camera is our active camera, which is useful if we have multiple cameras in our scene and we want to be able to switch between each one. We can also change the units of measurement in Blender. At the moment it's on metric for me. I could change this to imperial and you can see that all of our measurements change. You can also see the reflection of that on the grid in our viewport. Now over to the World Properties tab. The World Properties allows us to control various things in the scene. For example, we could change the colour of the background for rendering. To show this, I'm just going to come into our render preview. And then if I change the colour here, you see it changes the background. I'll just click Ctrl Z to undo that action, and I'm going to go back into solid mode. The next tab we have is the Object Properties. This is just another area where we can manipulate the object we currently have selected. If I select the camera, for example, you can see that it just shows us the camera object options. Back to the cube. Now it's the cube options. Similar to the transformation tools we used in the previous video, I could put some values in here which would change the cube. For example, 90 here would move the cube up by 90 meters on the z-axis. If I zero it out, it goes back to normal. The next tab is the Modifiers properties. This is probably one of the more important areas of the Properties tabs. This allows us to do more advanced manipulation of our meshes. I will use some modifiers as an example of what we can do, but I won't go into detail on every single one in this video. For example, we could do an array, which essentially duplicates the mesh. I could do a count of 5 to make 5 cubes. I could even give a bit of an offset. I could also do a simple deform modifier, which deforms the mesh. You can twist it or bend it, make a taper, or even stretch it. There are many modifiers to choose from, and they are very powerful when it comes to our 3D modeling in Blender. The next tab is the particle properties, which can do a number of things. They allow us to create particles. They're also useful for hair creation. I'm going to give you a quick example of what you can do. If I create a particle set system and choose hair, you can see it's put hair on this cube. Obviously it looks very strange because it is just straight lines, but you can also groom them later on. I'm going to remove the particle system by coming to this minus icon here. The next tab is the physics properties, which allow you to create physics. Again, I'll give you an example of what we can do with physics in Blender. I'm going to move the cube up here. If I press the spacebar to activate the timeline, you will see that nothing happens to the cube. Now watch what happens if I put a cloth modifier on the cube, which gives it physics, and I press spacebar. You can see the cube is now falling because it has physics. Let's bring the timeline back to 0 and remove the physics by coming to this X button here to cancel the physics. The next tabs you will notice are the object constraint properties and the object data properties tabs. These are too high level for our Blender beginner tutorial series, so we'll move on to the materials properties. I will show you what we can do with the material property tab, and we will create a new material for this cube. With the cube selected, let's click new to create a new material, and we can change the base color here to red. Make sure we are in the material preview to see our color. However, materials can do so much more than this. There are many settings involved, and you can also mix and match textures and even blend them together to create more advanced materials. The last tab is texture properties, although we won't go into detail about this, and again we can cover this in a future video. I know I've said that a lot, but this is the user interface tutorial part, so I don't want to go into too much depth on a lot of these tabs when they will be covered in more detail in their own videos. Before I end this video, I just want to say, I know a lot of this can appear intimidating to start with. The thing about Blender is that it has everything you need for 3D modelling, even though you'll probably not even use all of it. To be very honest with you, I don't even use every single tab here in Blender. I spend most of my time in the Modifiers tab and the Materials tab. It is only with consistent studying and playing around with the software where you can truly get to a point where you can master it. You are doing great so far, so let's keep persevering. If anything confuses you, you can always rewatch the video or play around with it yourself in Blender. I find that after watching a tutorial video, it always helps just to have a quick look through the tabs or even the user interface or whatever you've covered in a bit more detail. This way you are a bit more prepared for the next video. Thank you for watching. In the next video we will finally start diving into 3D modelling.